are in listen-only mode.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. It's Robert Wygant and with Roger Grant, Rob Holson, and joining us today is Jeffrey Willett from Nemetschek Vectorworks, who's going to be talking to us today about their software, what they're doing, and you know how the BIM world is affecting them and how they're affecting the BIM world. You know, a handful of things we're going to be going through today. You know, first is just introducing everybody and getting the ball rolling. You know, some goals for the meeting, and then we'll turn it over to Jeffrey, who can, you know, really get into depth about Vectorworks and answer any questions that you might have, and go from there. I think Roger had a couple of things that he wanted to start with. Did you, Roger?
Well, we might just talk a few minutes about where we're going from here, I guess.
Yep.
Bob, our next topics. I think some of the things we've had this thread going on periodically, looking at some of the tools that are out there, specifications, tools that interact with BIM, and some of the BIM authoring tools as well. And so I think we'll keep that going periodically, but one of the things you and I were discussing was this idea of maybe looking at some of the product model, product information resource websites, and what they're doing and how they're organizing things. And
right. So yeah, we invite some individuals from the different content libraries and resources for BIM to sort of create almost a web roundtable to discuss how everybody is handling it, the type of standards that are being implemented, and some best practices that each of them have. In addition to that, another idea for a topic that's come up is implementing OmniClass into the different BIM authoring tools. How it can be done, some ideas of how the different OmniClass tables can apply based on the different types of projects and the different requirements for those projects. Some are more detailed than others and require a lot more information. Others may only want to use something like master format and uniformat in order to organize the information. So yeah, those are two that are, you know, sort of right on the front burner that we're thinking about. And as always, we're looking for you, the involved members of the practice group, to think about ideas of things that you would want to see. You know, we try to be, you know, not so much BIM neutral as we are omni BIM, where, you know, in 1 month we might talk about Vectorworks, the next month we might talk about Bentley, the next month we might talk about Revit, and so that way we're not only staying unbiased, but we're giving people information that applies to each of these pieces of software.
We've tried to keep that focus, and that seems to be the right way to do it. So we'll keep that up. But at the same time, you know, it's good to present what specific companies doing, because that helps educate everybody about what's possible. So.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, because that's really how you put the rubber to the road, is in the day-to-day usage of the different software platforms.
So, you know, we're always, as Bob said, always open. If you got any ideas along the lines of topics for the future, throw them out there. Send us an email, or you can type it into the chat or the message line, and we'll capture it for this meeting.
Right. Right. And then as well, we're always looking for individuals who want to get more involved with the practice group. Right now, we're looking for somebody who can be our faithful scribe and sort of take notes. We're looking at another way of doing it where we might be able to, rather than present notes, be able to present the entire group session online, or translate translate the transcript into text. So we're looking for somebody who's interested or willing to take on that role of sort of being the secretary of the practice group. And then another big one is that I've been chairing the practice group for 2 years now, and it's the BIM practice group, not the Bob's practice group. So I'm starting to think about how best to get another chair involved, whether it's a co-chair like Roger or somebody who would be interested in taking over the chair responsibilities. I want to stay very much involved, but I also want others to take the lead on this, because I'm just one set of ideas, and there's always other people with other ideas out there that might want to lead this group in other directions. So anybody who might be interested in chairing the practice group, we're definitely interested in looking at somebody who might be able to do that. Once a month, it's not a lot of effort. So.
Yeah, hey Bob, I'm getting a couple comments that people can't hear us real well. So I don't know. You're loud and clear to me, but
yeah, yours seems to be going in and out a little bit, Roger.
Does it?
Yeah, it's getting a little bit lighter and a little bit.
Okay, well, I'll try to speak right into my microphone. I'm not sure what the issue is, but anyway, you all have the perfect opportunity to raise your hand if you're interested. Just use the hand raise function there in GoToWebinar, and we'll acknowledge your interest in being a volunteer to help us.
Yeah, I'm seeing a question just noting that your mic is not projecting.
I hear you okay now.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like it's a little bit better now. But in any event, it's just something to think about as far as if you have an interest in becoming involved. We're very interested in getting more people involved, because it's a big group. There's something like 800 people, and getting a handful of different ideas into the mix really can help take the BIM practice groups to the next level. I've always looked at it as something of a virtual chapter, and just like with any other chapter, you need to change leadership every now and again just to keep things fresh and to get some new ideas into the mix. So, with that, we'll give you that to chew on while we're listening to Jeffrey. But Roger, did you have any items that you want to discuss prior to turning this over to Jeffrey?
No, I think we're good to go on, Bob.
Jeffrey, I appreciate you taking the time. Again, it's Jeffrey Willett from Nemetschek Vectorworks. He's an associate AIA and a BIM specialist. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, and if we could just switch the slides over to Jeffrey, we can get the ball rolling.
Okay.
And can everybody see the presentation okay?
Yeah, I can see it good on my end. So.
Okay. So thanks, Bob, Roger, and Rob for inviting me here today. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to everyone about something that we at Nemetschek Vectorworks feels very important to the future of our profession of architecture and the building industry as a whole, and the use of technology to move forward. I am a part of the R&D team here at Nemetschek Vectorworks, and we like to joke around about what it is I do and what my title is, including BIMologist or virtual practitioner. And part of my job is to interact as a liaison between our engineering staff and the architecture community at large, and help the engineers understand what the needs are for the architecture industry and the building industry, and then also help them design features that address these issues. At the same time, also giving feedback back to our users and helping them understand how to use Vectorworks as a BIM tool. So with that, there's an awful lot of information and buzz, talk, and hype about BIM these days, and there's so much of it it's really hard to miss. And so much of it is coming from so many different points of view, it's hard to really sort out what's important or truly meaningful to the way architects and their design partners work today. So what are we trying to do today? And I hope I can provide some answers to questions about effective BIM technologies and processes that can be used by everyone today. So where should we start? Let's start by clearing up some misconceptions. And make sure we're talking about the same thing. When it comes to what BIM is and what BIM isn't. The point is that no software is BIM in and of itself. They're just pieces of a bigger picture. And if we accept the common understanding that BIM is the whole of the technology and the processes that technology serves that comprise the formulation, design, analysis, encoding, decoding, fabrication, simulation, and management of a project, then we also have to recognize that many different kinds of technology exist today that address different viewpoints or workflows to move the process forward. And the needs and preferences of users in the entire, AECO spectrum are already extraordinarily diverse, and that scope is still expanding as more people understand what BIM is and how they can leverage the data and the technology. So how an architect interacts with this information is different than an electrical engineer, which is different than a geotechnical consultant, which is different than a facility manager. And as such, each user should be able to go to the marketplace and choose the tools that fit their needs, their domain expertise, their size, their project types, the construction methods that they're used to, whatever. Because no single application or vendor platform can satisfy every user need in every market, and that's a global market these days, it's not just a national market, and in every discipline. So how do we move the industry forward? And let's take a look at that previous formula and reconsider it as this. In other words, while we look at all the processes and technologies possible to do BIM, they're all a subset of the overarching concept that ties them together. The concept of interoperability, and by definition that is the ability to exchange data and make use of the information. And in this case we're talking about building data, right? I mean, after all, digital interoperability is nothing new to us, is it? The internet itself would not exist without standardized protocols and schemas like HTTP and HTML to encode, transfer, store, decode, and display all the data we have and continue to push to all ends of the earth. And all BIM applications have a unique native proprietary file format because the technology used is a particular way of creating and storing data. This helps the developers create differentiating features that lure customers in the marketplace, and most companies are protective of these technologies. And as such, they're not really directly compatible with each other. So there's a need for translation or transformation of the desired data to move from one system to the next. And many of the mechanisms that are available today for moving that data between systems, aren't very reliable, or they're limited in scope and capability, or are difficult and may be tightly controlled by a vendor for a particular market advantage, though not an industry advantage. So what do? Where is the interoperability of BIM? Even if you have everyone using the same vendor's multitude of products, you're still really dealing with at least two, if not several file formats in order to accomplish all the different processes and workflows necessary. And as I said before, no vendor-based platform is even that complete, at least not in a single file format. So what is our option? At MCheck Vectorworks, we believe that option is what we call OpenBIM. And I believe my colleague at Graphisoft ArchiCAD, Monty Chapin, presented this notion to you last month, also known as Open Design Collaboration. Same concept. OpenBIM is the use of open international standards that define the technology used in the exchange of building information model data between project participants and stakeholders and their applications. The use of a well-defined, non-proprietary standard that can be implemented by anyone means that a vendor only needs to support one format instead of several proprietary formats that may require you some licensing acrobatics and a great deal of resources. And that support isn't necessarily just from a application point of view either. I mean, we're also talking support for things like product libraries, right? Instead of having 2, 3, 4 different file formats, why not just provide everything in one format for all the platforms to use? And from a larger perspective of implementing the technology, it's about using practical means of sharing ideas and data and collaborating more fluidly and effectively than some of the traditional drawing-based methods. And today, that real interoperability can only be accomplished by using open standard technology. It's a robust, industry-centric data format for the building industry. And that's IFCs, or Industry Foundation Classes. It's a funny acronym. It's kind of a strange name for people. It's based on the idea of a programming language or a programming library that connects 2 different systems together. That's what foundation classes are. And in this case, the industry is the building industry. It's a standardized data format like HTML and PDF. The specification for the code is open source. It's freely available for the public and to use, and developers to create their own tools and to handle the data format. All vendors have equal access, and they're able to write import and export technology for this format. No single vendor controls it, revises it, owns it, determines who gets to use it, or makes money from licensing the technology. It is open. Now, the information that IFC contains or encodes has 2 primary parts: geometry and data. The geometry specification is also based on another ISO standard, another international standard, known as STEP. And that's a data format initially developed for geometry of solids modeling, such as used in the mechanical engineering and design applications. So, in addition, with solids, surfaces, and NURB support, the IFC geometry specification is really robust and can accommodate any geometric condition an architectural designer can come up with. What makes IFC unique is the data connected to the geometry as it relates to buildings. And this data contains the following aspects: semantics, or the meanings or identity of a collection of geometry, such as an extruded rectangle. Is it a column? Is it a portion of a wall? Is it a pilaster? What is it? Relationships, how semantic objects are related or connected to each other. What kind of interaction does that column have with things like floor slabs above and floor slabs below, or other framing members that may be attached to it, or the spaces that surround it? And then properties or attributes, which can further specify what kind of physical properties, like material, weight, and volume, and important qualitative data like unit cost or manufacturer name or number, model number, these things that are associated with a particular object they're important to track as part of the data. And that file format is expressed in an extension like IFC. That's the step-based file format. IFC XML is an XML interpretation of the same data. And then there's IFC zip, which is a compressed version of either of these formats. So let's quickly look at a few illustrations of how BIM information models from one platform are translated to IFC. Our first example here is a window inserted in a wall of a building model using Vectorworks Architect. And as we see on the small object information palette, the window is aware that it is in a wall, right? It knows it has been inserted. And it knows it's on a particular location in the wall, and it has a height and dimensions of about 8 feet wide and 8 feet tall, and it knows where it is in a wall as far as a head elevation to 10 feet. And it's important to know that the geometry of this window is very specific. There's 3 double hung sashes in here combined as one window. The building model when it's exported from Vectorworks and written as an IFC file, can be examined using another IFC compatible application. In this case, we're looking at Solibri Model Checker. You know, on the left you have Vectorworks, and on the right you have its IFC export displayed in Solibri. And so the window geometry at first glance appears to be the same. And if we, you know, look in the lower left-hand corner, the lower left-hand corner of the Solibri window, we can see that it's identified as a window object. It's not just some group or collection of dumb geometry. And we can also see that it maintains its knowledge of its location in the wall and the overall building, and that it has the same overall dimensions, and that it maintains its relationship with the wall it's inserted in, the story it's on, even the space it is related to behind the wall. So the IFC file becomes a 3D snapshot of the BIM. It acts as a vault of the geometry and data and freezing it from a native BIM app and making it portable. So here we have a little bit more developed model, right, with a few more features using objects like walls, floors, door, window, and space. And what we see here is the result of that same model exported as an IFC file. On the left, I'm looking at that IFC file in a simple text editor. It's 858 lines of code, about 45,000 characters, and in a raw text format that you can actually read in a human language way, right? Now, it's a little bit cryptic, but you can go through and it has, you know, line numbers, and there's a nomenclature there that is understood by the human being. So the information of IFC is not only machine readable, but it's also human readable. And this information can be viewed and analyzed by other IFC compatible apps for purposes like quantity takeoff or model information verification. I think one of the tools that we use, and at least internally a lot, is we use the Solibri Model Checker. And especially with version 6.1, they've added this this new information takeoff capability, and it's a pretty powerful tool.
Hey, Jeff.
Yes.
It's Bob. I got a question. Now, I mean, I see that I see you looking at IFC in terms of going from Vectorworks to Solibri, and it's sort of because Solibri is really a viewer.
Yes.
It's kind of ephemeral, where it's designed for sort of downstream after the model is created. Now anybody can look at this, and that's good. I mean, I think it's a great approach. But the one thing that I've always seen as missing from the picture is the ability to actually work between two platforms, where if somebody, let's say you're working in Vectorworks and I'm working in Revit, being able to export the model or import the model from Vectorworks to Revit via IFC without any loss of control. And that's sort of been the sticking point, where if you have components that are created in Revit, and then you go to use them in Vectorworks, they kind of become static objects, and that's sort of what happens when something becomes a step file, is you lose the ability for the parametrics within those components to be changed.
Yes, and that is by design right now. I mean,
right,
it is essentially by design, and over time, as we work in the Building Smart implementation group, support group, right now we're trying to get to a point of parity amongst all the platforms, and
right.
This is kind of where I'm leading to next. Is besides getting people to understand that not only are we dealing with an open standard, but it has international support, and that support comes from many different points of view, and that because of that, we also have a lot of vendor support, right? So you got over 70 international vendors. You have over 110 individual applications and growing, okay? And this covers a wide spectrum. And what's important right now is that we are in the process of of creating a level playing field for the use of IFC between all of the platforms. And right now everybody is participating. Autodesk is participating, Bentley, Graphisoft, and ourselves, and along with the other downstream or partner applications. And the plan is by calendar year 2011, probably second quarter, you'll begin to see these applications release their certified versions of the software. Now, the importance behind that is getting people to understand that IFC works from a data interchange point of view. The next step after we get past this platform certification process will be working on workflows, right? And more model view definitions and more workflows that can do things like transfer parametric information so that a object from one system can be properly translated into the native object of another system.
Right.
That's not the focus today. The focus today is just getting everybody to be able to read and write IFC files the exact same way. And that's a big, huge, that's a big step. And what I'm getting at is this idea of, well, what does that mean in terms of real use, right? What is the use case for IFCs right now, the way that they are and the way that they work? So I'm going to show everyone a case study that I put together beginning last year with the launch of Vectorworks 2010. And part of it was about testing, Vectorworks use as a BIM tool, but also, really pushing and exploring our IFC implementation and how that was related to some realistic, building design and workflows. So we have this, proposal for an office building, moderate size, typical characteristics for a, U.S. Mid-Atlantic real estate market. We just picked a site in Washington, D.C., something that looked like, hey, we could do a proposal there on Google Earth and wouldn't compromise anything. And then, we brought about had this idea of, well, what's the project team? Looked at a simplified but pretty general, pretty typical beginning project team for a project like this, right? So you have the owner, architect, structural engineer, MEP, engineer, the general contractor, and then this idea of a BIM manager coordinator is kind of the new part to all of this, right? And that BIM manager coordinator isn't necessarily a completely separate entity or party, but it could be a component of any one of these members, internal teams or organizations. But the idea is the value of that BIM manager coordinator is to take responsibility for ensuring that the right data moves to the right people at the right time. Again, what I'm talking about here is using IFC as a platform, not using a vendor's application as a platform in order to exchange data. And part of that is because, not everybody is using the same technology all the time, right? So we wanted to consider an instance in what technology a team and its members might be using, and typically the owner really is engaged technologically in the process. Many times they don't even really know what they're asking for when they're asking for BIM, but what they're being told is, hey, you got to have BIM because this is going to save you money and you're going to get a lot more done. It's going to come quicker and you're going to be happier in the end. So, what they're relying on is that the service providers have the ability to provide them a solution and don't know that much about the technology, So in this case, we're saying, the architect uses, Vectorworks Architect 2010. The structural engineer is using Nemetschek STIA Engineer. It's a member of the Nemetschek family. And there's no need to hide, though, that tool is completely different than the architect's tool. It should be, right? And then you have the MEP engineers that are using DDS CAD from Data Design Systems. They're based in Norway. And it's a completely standalone system. It's not, a plug-in to AutoCAD. And you're able to create 2D and 3D BIM models using the software. And the contractor might be using, Navisworks Manage to as a visualization tool and as a process timeline tool, and then also the Solibri model checker to do things like the information takeoffs. But then additionally, you have the BIM manager or coordinator using Solibri model checker as a way of analyzing, reporting on, and coordinating all of this BIM data, right? And we didn't focus on the intricacies of the project delivery. I mean, there's really many options that are compatible with the OpenBIM technologies and the design partners' processes. So we didn't really focus on this, but we did focus on using the AIA E202 2008 BIM protocol exhibit as a guide to the staging and requirements of the staged models, right? Because it has a very good documentation, such as the model element table, to assign responsibility for the model development to different participants for the different stages of the model and process. And it also lays out kind of a unique set of stages for the design process. They somewhat overlap the traditional workflows that many architects are used to, but instead of 7 or 8 stages, there's really only 5. And they focus more on the development of the detail in the BIM, in the model itself, and how that can immediately dovetail in the processes and the responsibilities of all the team members. So I'm just going to focus on the LOD 200 portion of this project. We developed a 100, a 200, and a 300, and we're in the process now of adding more and more partners, talking with Tekla, talking with PlanCal, talking with other people to say, hey, can you participate in this process of exchanging IFC models? Now, the whole project can be found on our website, and people can even download the IFC files themselves and deal with them. And the workflow that we're really talking about here, is very typical of what most design teams do, right? So an architect kind of develops a program, massing studies, does site analysis and development, and then is able to deliver kind of this preliminary, massing and program data. And then in 200, they're really starting to create a design BIM. And here's where you have kind of a very basic representation of walls, floors, fenestration materials. You're not dealing with a lot of detail. Because when we look at this, we're not showing a lot of construction intent detail. We're really just locating things, and we're kind of showing materiality. But there's no real need for a lot of construction detail, like framing or waterproofing necessarily. But you may want to include important design features, to determine if their feasibility, if they're feasible early on, instead of waiting after they've been thoroughly detailed and planned for. And the architect's doing all this with input from the structural engineer to determine structural concept, like the bay dimensions and the floor-to-floor heights. And there's also input from MEP engineers about various building surfaces concepts. I mean, these are ways that architects and their design teams work today without going into a single model, single data model, single platform workflow. So even with a relatively small amount of detail, a design concept, you can get a pretty comprehensive picture of the architecture, and you can begin to develop and have a very informative base for everyone else to begin to add more information. So the architect creates this, this first real design BIM, and then they're able to share that as a reference background for the component development, right, with the structural engineer and the MEP engineer by exporting this architectural fabric, right, as part of IFC. And here's what that file looks like as an IFC file. So it looks the same. All of the elements are there. All of the data structure of that building is the same. And if I look at it in DDS CAD, I see the same model. Now the colors are different. Right now the colors are not a focus. They are going to be a part of the certification process. But it looks the same. All the elements are there, and they're all there in the right place. And the same with in SIA, right? So what these are is these are used as backgrounds so that the engineers can then begin to develop their systems, right? And so it's a system not all that different from exchanging 2D DWGs, but the problem with the 2D DWG exchange workflow is instead of just having one, you're going to have multiple DWGs for multiple viewpoints, right? And you're going to be constantly coordinating these manually. You're going to have plans, you're going to have sections, you're going to have elevations, multiple section cuts in different directions. But why not model it? Why not have everything in a truly 3D representation so that you can begin to coordinate very quickly the location of services to the architectural fabric, as I like to say, or even the structure, with the structural model. And this structural model was created very quickly. There's not even a whole week's worth of work here. This is mainly about verifying that the structural concept is possible, it's feasible, right? There doesn't have to be any connection detailing. There doesn't have to be a whole lot of load design. There's a lot of rule of thumb here in order to get to just to this level of model development. And so everybody creates their IFCs, their IFC exports, and the BIM manager coordinator takes these components and is able to merge them and do things like clash detection, right? And then report on this clash detection or data verification and report these conflicts and distribute these models back and reports to the designers for resolution. That isn't to say the designers couldn't be doing it among themselves, but with a BIM manager coordinator, you have somebody that ensures that the right data is going in the right direction at the right time, right? And that people aren't stepping over each other, trying to make changes to the model that they're not either authorized to make because it's not a part of their domain, or that there's a lot of fluid decision making going on and where things kind of move back and forth. And so it kind of adds a sanity checking step in the whole entire process. And again, they do this again until each party, they've resolved their conflicts, and then the BIM manager coordinator does the validation work to the point where they reach a end to that stage, right? They all have an agreement on how far they want to develop in terms of detail. Then that merged BIM is distributed and given to the contractor who can do a quantity and cost analysis. And the design teams can then take that as a reference and go back and begin to develop their design even further. And this continues on for the LOD 300 part of the process too. And as I said, it's all these models and the information about this project is available on our website. So people can look at this and see how this process works. And understand that sharing an intelligent 3D data instead of just dumb drawings, but sharing it in a file-based exchange like they do today, you are able to control or maintain control over your domain. And one of the slides I kind of skipped over here before was this idea of data integrity, right? The ownership of that data. Who has access to it? How secure is it? Its portability. I don't have to worry about, who's got what version of a particular vendor's platform, who's got any additional like plugins or, third-party plugins or whatever. Are they up to date? Am I able to, be compatible with them? Because the IFC, yes, it strips out all of those parametrics, but there is a way, and we'll see that in the future, for IFC to communicate those important parametrics in a way that the receiving application can then reconstitute a parametric object if needed in their own native format. The problem with that, of course, is doing things like tracking. And when I mean tracking, I mean revision tracking of those objects when they get changed. There is a data structure there in IFC to look and see the history of objects, but when we start going through a process of translating objects back and forth between native file formats. The question is, how well does that system still work in being able to control and track that that history. And the idea is that everybody's able to coordinate building data and not have to worry about coordinating software. And with using this workflow, you're sharing only what is needed when it's needed, right? I mean, you can control what information goes out and shared with other partners when you feel like you have a definitive, set of things that you want to share with people, and not try to give them things that you aren't sure about, if they're done yet, or if the designs or decisions have been made yet. And also, parallel systems, parallel processes and designs can happen, which is much more efficient than everybody trying to kind of interact on the same thing at the same time and push each other around and kind of elbow against each other in order to make changes or get an understanding of what's happening when. So, everybody gets to spend more time working on the design and less time managing who gets to touch what and when of any particular piece of data. And that everybody gets to participate, regardless of their technological expertise, as long as they have something of value to add or extract in a tool that's IFC compatible. And that's what I have for you today.
All right, thank you, Jeff. That was really insightful. I mean, I'm looking at this and I've got a ton of things going through my head. But before I jump in, does anybody have any questions? I don't see I haven't seen much in the way of hands raised. But I might throw this one out. In going through the E202, the AIA LOD, the level
Yes.
of description.
Development, yep.
Development, excuse me. It's very subjective. What can be considered 100, 200, 300, up to 500. There's nothing that really defines, what makes up a 100 versus a 400. And I'm curious as to what you used as a benchmark, because I mean I've developed my own benchmark for it, but this is one of those aspects that really should be more clearly detailed and more clearly laid out.
Well, I think the reason I think they left it as open as they did is that when you look at the BIM protocol exhibit, it's really it's not a hard and fast set of rules as much as it's a point or a platform to negotiate, what everybody needs at what point in time. Because for every project and for every team, it may be a little bit different,
Yeah,
So for
I
me,
agree.
and so there's going to be some nuances that some, some people like the architect are going to be able to lay out in 200 that they're then going to turn over to control in 300. But then again, there might be things where the architect just says, I'm only doing this much, and because I can give them a good model, the design partners can begin to develop schematic design models also. And I think that's kind of different in a lot of processes too, because what happens a lot of times is the architect goes a long way in their development, and then the consultants start getting involved, and there's a lot of backtracking that has to happen.
Right, but I mean I'm looking at it also on more of a micro level. So if you let's take a door for instance. A door, I mean it's not just the model itself that is that's set at the LOD, but the components themselves. There's a certain amount of detail that's desired at different points in the project. For instance,
Right.
at LOD 100, all you need to know is that, well, really, you don't really need to know anything other than a massing study, but at, say, LOD 200, all you need to know is that something is an opening.
Yes, that the door exists and that there's a location for it.
Right, but when you get to LOD 300, is it a swing door, is it a sliding door? At 400, is it a wood sliding door, is it a wood swing door, is it a glazed swing door? And at 500, it's, who's the manufacturer. So you have that level of detail that applies to each individual component above and beyond, or part and parcel with the project itself.
Right.
So, looking into of all of these individual components, making determinations of how much information goes into each component in order to make sure that it's consistent with the level of detail of the overall project.
Mm-hmm.
And that I see as an essential aspect as well.
Yeah, but again, I think the interesting part about what the AIA did is they essentially left a lot of those decisions. They have a guideline, but then they left a lot of those decisions, up to the design team to really figure out what was important and when. And I think part of that is because, you may have a design team in which you're working with people you're used to working with, you're aware of their capabilities, whether it's other engineers or whether it's the contractor, and you can decide as a team who's going to want what when, who's going to want that level of detail, and then who's responsible for modeling of it based on what everybody else wants or needs. So maybe on a fast track situation, the contractor wants to know even at the 200 level, how many doors am I going to have and what sizes are they going to be? And I need to get close
Right.
enough. And that at 300, he already needs to know all of the detail about the frame, about, is it a knockdown hollow metal frame? And if it is, who are my possible suppliers? And then it isn't until 500 that he formalizes and he says, well, it was this guy that I installed.
And this could be documented
Mm-hmm.
in the supporting documentation that goes along at each level, I think, Bob.
Yes.
They could specify the amount of detail that's needed based on if there's a preliminary project description prepared at level 200 or a outline spec at a level 300 or some documents that at least correspond to those. That could help to clear up the level of detail for a particular project. And I guess my mic still isn't working any better. I thought I made an adjustment, but
There, you're okay. I can hear you.
all right. Well, as I was saying, I think it can't be cleared up with the documentation that accompanies each level that helps dial that in for the particular project or team.
And I think one of the things that I try to get people to understand too is that this is a process that has to be planned and negotiated ahead of time and designed in much the same way that the building itself gets designed. And in that, you're going to spend relatively, in the overall project structure, a small amount of time in order to do this and get a lot more out of it than you would by just simply diving in head on, right? And at this point, you talk about things like, well, what are everybody's expectations, at each part of the process. So everybody knows up front that, the contractor wants to be able to do pricing based on some specific metrics, and he can tell up front what exactly he needs and when he needs it. And and I think, and again, as I said, I think it depends on the project and it depends on the team, but it's time that's valuable. It's valuable. It's well.
I was just going to interject. If anybody wants to join the conversation, just raise your hand and we'll unmute you and you can join in. So feel free if you're out there and want to talk with us. I think we're just discussing at this point. I was going to add that I think this illustrates one of those changes in practice that we all say are out there, but you don't often get a chance to identify exactly what they are. And I think with respect to documentation, I don't think we've transitioned yet to documenting these different phases as thoroughly as we're going to need to support this different process. So if we were preparing a well-organized, thought-out preliminary project description to go along with that level 200, then we would probably address a lot of these issues, but that still doesn't seem to be very common practice yet. And I think it's something that'll change as we use this more.
Hey,
I think one of the useful
Michael White has his hand raised for about a minute here. I just unmuted him. Michael, can you did you
Yeah.
chime in with
Yeah. Hey, Jeff. How are you?
Not too bad. How are you, Michael?
Good. Good. You did a really great job. That was really good. Hey, what I was wondering about this level of development stuff is it's probably the same with all the tools out there, is that when we get into parametric objects, it seems like we're barraged with tons of like options and buttons, which are all valuable, but it almost seems like when we do like parametric windows and doors and stairs, it almost seems like there needs to be a level of development 200 tab, which just asks you the very basics. Because I've fallen into the trap too, where you open up one of these parametric tools and it asks you all these questions and you think, oh, I've got to answer them all, and you start answering them all and you start getting bogged down, and you know, I suppose most of it's probably self-discipline, but it's just, there's just so many questions. It just seems like all the parametric tools. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think today most of the tools are flexible enough that you can be as specific or as generic as you want up front, and the object still, you know, represents something. It can be a placeholder, right? I mean, you can create a very simple, you know, stair in all the applications and just say, this is good enough for now, and then when I have to, I'll, you know, select it and change it, or, you know, go through a process of, you know, viewing a table or a schedule and start to make changes to the data. But I think a lot of that has to do with, you know, as Roger kind of mentioned, is this idea of the practice that everybody's used to doing. And I think it's adjusting how people use their tools, or they're used to using their tools, as much as it's about kind of rethinking the way that they design. I mean, I know, you know, I worked at about a dozen different architecture firms before I started at Nemetschek, and, you know, the most consistent advice I had in each of those firms was, don't draw what you don't know. Don't put in data or write things down if you don't know what they are, because the more you assume, then the more you're going to have to go back, erase, and change and redraw when somebody finally makes up their mind or changes what they're thinking further on down the road. And I think the great thing about the tools that we have, that users have available today, is that yes, it makes it easy to get very specific and it makes it easy to change, but it also makes it easy to develop a workflow in which you can be very generic, and then you can begin to add more and more as you know more and as time goes on. And
okay, thanks. That was a good job.
That's some really good advice. But moving on, Brian Lightheart had a question also. Brian, you there? Brian?
Is your mic on, Brian?
I had unmuted him, so.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe his mic's not on.
But that was, you know, that I think, you know, don't draw what you don't know is some pretty good advice.
And you know,
we're happy to see. I'm just going to point out, Jeff, that we're happy to see that AIA, in putting together the level of detail, used the latest version of Uniformat. So, you know, you talked a lot about enforcing and moving the IFC standard forward, but I think these other standard ways of organizing information are also important to support use, and Uniformat in the LOD is a good example of that.
Yeah. And with the, you know, in the past, some of the workshops that we've been a part of, the test beds, like the GSA OGC test bed, you know, there was a lot of work that one of the members did on trying to sort everything out via Uniformat for everybody to classify. And you know, if you look at the Celebri model checker, you have that option. And what it does is it helps, you know, it helps to organize things and organize things, you know, early on in the process. And I think in a way that a lot of people aren't used to doing up to this point. You know, they're focusing so much on drawing and output, all of what BIM is about is focusing on the data, right, and the model and creating this virtual prototype. And it may start out very, simple and mushy. I mean, what's on the screen right now, looks like it's a lot of work and a lot of detail, but, that's not much time spent there. That's a lot of defaults and a lot of very simple, presets and things just to create that amount of information. And it is going to be a big adjustment for a lot of people, for the profession to kind of get used to doing.
Hey Jeff, do you have any prognostication? We had a question here, even though, like you said, a lot of people are asking for BIM and they don't even know what they're asking for.
Mm-hmm.
The output ends up still coming in 2D.
Yes.
You've laid out some way here that this could actually all work through data exchange, but where do you think that is? When do you think that might be the way of practicing versus the ideal?
Well, I think realistically what we see is a hybrid process going on right now in which not only do we share IFC files for coordination, but we also share, have to share, unfortunately it's DWG, but there is no other open alternative, is to share DWG files in order to coordinate kind of the 2D output or drawing information. And I think that's, everybody's willing to work down that road. Everybody has very robust DWG support. But at least with IFC, you have a 3D option, and you have an intelligent, semantic data 3D option for doing that coordination. And PDFs are very useful for output and final presentation and for archiving, and they can, some systems work better with PDFs than others in terms of, underlays and referencing and stuff like that. But, truth is, DWG is not going to go away anytime soon.
Well, yeah, and, I think at the end of the day, until there's no dust on a job site, you're not going to see somebody, you're going to see 2D rolled up plans in the hands of contractors. Because it's just not practical to do it any other way at this point. So,
well, and a lot of legal requirements too, make it clear that those have to be there. But what's interesting is the number of, kind of starts about, BIM guidelines that are now including IFC, not just, Ohio and Wisconsin, but you've got the San Diego Community College District and others that are trying, and of course the GSA and Sonate and Statsbig, but others that are saying, hey, we have to figure out what form we want this data in, because we really have to rethink how we use this data.
mm-hmm.
Do we need a data format that we can directly manipulate, or be able to directly manipulate? And if so, what does that mean to maintaining applications in order to access that data? Is it a DWG 12 file or is it a DWG 2008 file? Do I have an application that can read those? What does that mean in terms of storage and archiving and everything?
No, I know, and then as new features are added to the software, how do you manage that as time goes on? Because not every software platform is is making the same updates at the same time.
Hey,
right.
Jeff, I had one more question. And maybe then that we're going to have to cut it off, but maybe you were going there too, Bob. But the one question was, you've got these levels of detail, which I think starts to help address what's going on at different points in the project, but you still end up, it's not a perfect transition from level to level. So how do you track that, where you are?
Well, again, I think it's through the documentation of the E202, but I think it's also that person or that group, that team that is the BIM coordinator manager. And I think that's why they're crucial, is that their only job is to manage the flow of that data, the integrity of that data, rather than making the data themselves. And when you have that kind of component in the whole process, then I think you're assured that everybody is on board and in the right place at the same time. Rather than people kind of, scattering about. I mean, if we look at some of even the AIA IPD case studies, there's a lot of coordination that goes on, a lot of team meetings that go on to make sure, and communication to make sure that people, are doing the right thing at the right time.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I want to thank you for this, Jeff. It's been great, very interesting, and a very well put together overview and presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I enjoyed it.
Appreciate everybody for coming out. Rob, if you wouldn't mind just putting up that last slide with everybody's contact info.
Oh, I think I've got that. Yeah. And while I'm switching back to that slide, yeah, here we go. While I'm switching back to my slide, just to point out to everybody, in a couple weeks in December 4 through 6, or 6 through 9, is the Building Smart meetings and EcoBuild. And so if you're in Washington area, there's a lot of chance to come out and learn about a number of these things that are going on. And
I'll be there.
Also, yeah, and on the 7th, we're having an OmniClass technology implementation and sponsor group meeting. So we're getting an implementation group going around OmniClass. We'll maybe give you a little update on what happened there on our next meeting. But our next meeting looks like the 17th of December, Bob?
Yep, yeah, it's December 17th. We're back to a Friday. This was, we had to switch it to a Tuesday just because of scheduling conflicts. But we'll be back to December 17th. And as I had mentioned earlier, if there's anybody who's interested in getting involved either as a panelist, as a chair, or as a either a working individual within the practice group, email myself or Roger, and we can get you in touch and get the ball rolling.
Yeah, and also if you have any questions for Jeff, let us know. We'll pass them on to him. And Jeff, I don't know, we'll see if we can get maybe some of these slides or something from you to post for people that are interested.
You bet.
Okay, great.
All right. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.